And I just turned around and I hauled ass out of there. I was done. I wasn't dealing with that.
The hypocrisy of the cult is one of the things that turned me away the quickest.
When I turned my headlights on, it turned and looked at us, and one of the things I remember the most were the eyes were glowing red.
I see an orb of light. It is just circling these steps like it is waiting for me.
And he begins to tell them that he saw a UFO. They're basically like, what are you talking about? That's 7 foot up on a tree, peeking around it. And that's where I saw the top of the muzzle, nose, and the eyes. As soon as I made eye contact with this thing, it felt like death.
Welcome back to Tinfoil Tales. I'm your host, Brandon Wright. Tonight we're going to be joined by my guest, Ari. Ari is fascinated with Project Paperclip. She's done some research into that topic, along with what happened with the Nazis after World War II and how they were brought over into the U.S. government. There's a lot of weird stuff that went on during that time, and we're going to dive into some of that here tonight. But before we bring her on, if you've ever had an experience or you'd like to be on an episode of Tinfoil Tales, make sure to send an email to tinfoiltalespodcast@gmail.com or go to tinfoiltales.com and go to the contact section. Whichever way works for you will work for me. Just make sure to get a message to me. We'll get something to schedule for a future episode. If you'd like to help the podcast out, please keep sharing it around. Word of mouth is the best way of getting it out there. You can also leave a 5-star rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts at. That helps with the rankings. If you'd like to help the podcast even more, you can join the Patreon. There's different tiers on there. You get access to ad-free content, all sorts of little goodies on there. Plus, the episodes are released earlier than what they are publicly, so as soon as I get done recording, they'll be put up on the Patreon. For more information about that, you can check out the show notes. Make sure to follow me on all the social medias. You can also find out more information about the merch store in the show notes, too. We're going to go ahead now and dive on into the topic with Ari. We've had this scheduled for a while, so I'm definitely looking forward to getting into it. Hope you guys enjoy our conversation. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. I'd like to take this time to welcome my guest tonight, Ari. Thanks for coming on here and talking to me.
Thank you for having me, Brandon.
Would you like to let the audience know a little bit about yourself?
My name is Ari. I have had a lifelong thirst for knowledge, especially into paranormal phenomena, specifically related to UFOs or UAP, as they're calling them nowadays. Since I was about 7, I've been really interested in UFOs. So that has led me down many different roads, and I've learned a lot of things based on that thirst for knowledge. So I have a lot of information rattling around in my brain all the time that I need to get out. So I'm happy to be here to be able to let some of that out.
Not to derail right off the bat, but you mentioned 7 years old, and I don't like to use the word synchronicities because it's way overused in this genre of topics, but
yeah, Carl Jung would be rolling in his grave for sure.
That age, 7 and 8, tends to be the time that people have been looking into studying, and that is the typical age when a lot of people start becoming very fascinated with UFOs and aliens.
I didn't know that. I actually honestly didn't know that that was a common theme.
I literally just learned that today.
Wow.
That's why I said it's odd timing you mentioned that. And I was listening to something else this morning, and it was discussed through a survey. People were talking about how they come about with stuff. Usually like 2nd and 3rd grade is when people were starting to like really get turned on to the UFO phenomena.
Yeah. And, I think I'm going to say you're around my age. It sounds like, I feel like for our generation, a little bit later on, we had like the X-Files. But for the most part, there was not much in pop culture at the time in the late 80s, early 90s regarding the subject, unless you really, really dug for it. Which kind of, for me, if there's anyone who says that they're an experiencer or that they've been fascinated with the subject since that age, it lends more credence, like credibility, that maybe there's actually something going on because there wasn't that exposure at a young age to things. Now it's everywhere. It's on the news at this point. So yeah, I just think that's kind of wild. Sorry, getting off topic, but
No, that's fine. The X-Files was my bread and butter as a kid. That was even
I could
there
I
was a
couldn't
movie
do
that
it.
came out that was the Travis Walton story. Obviously, it was kind of fabricated for the movie,
A
but
Fire in the Sky, yeah.
yep, that came out I think in 91, 92, 93, somewhere back in there. And I watched it. My aunt and uncle had it on video right after it came out. I watched it, and I would almost say it was traumatizing, but it was one of those movies that got me like kind of afraid of aliens because of the whole abduction stuff. And then the X Files was out around that time. I was a big fan of the X Files. I wanted to grow up and be Fox Mulder because I thought he was awesome.
Who doesn't though? I mean, that's what I wanted to do too.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
No,
here I am
I
20
oh
years
sorry.
later being a Fox Mulder in my basement, just like he was in the FBI headquarters.
Well,
But
it's all about talking to people, right? That's what
yeah,
he did a lot of. So
yeah. Back on topic, I guess. So you started to look into a lot of this stuff with what the Germans were doing after World War II. That's kind of how we got in touch with each other. But what drew you to be fascinated by that? If you want to talk about that for a second before we get into it.
yeah, absolutely. Um, Interestingly enough, I think the UFO connection is kind of what got me here. And then I learned about Operation Paperclip, which, in my opinion, was one of the single most devastating things to happen to the United States. And I became fascinated because of that. A lot of people, when I talk about it, take it the wrong way. They think I'm obsessed with Nazis. That's not the case. It's quite the opposite. I'm obsessed with it because I feel like it was this huge blanket of an event that was made. The secrecy around it was so well maintained, so well organized, and it was like the most perfect infiltration, really. And it just kind of dug into me, and I had to figure out what they were doing and why they did it and how they got away with something like this. As far as Nazis coming to America, and as far as all of the research they were doing, continuing, and how they were getting funding even after the war to keep going, it just really interested me after that.
I know there was a lot of backlash for when that happened and how he brought
Yeah,
over a lot of the scientists and stuff, but it was a different time. And then I know before we get into like Von Braun and NASA and
yeah,
all that,
that badass.
yeah, there's so much stuff that goes on with NASA that I am. For anyone that's listened to the podcast, I think everyone knows where I stand with NASA when it comes to their front. I don't believe a lot of the stuff that they say, but
So, since we're on the topic of NASA, if you don't mind, I wanted to share this anecdote from my life. Whenever I meet someone who is willing to humor me and I explain that NASA was started by a Nazi war criminal, they don't believe me. No one believes me. It's interesting how you said that there was such a backlash amongst the American public when paperclip was going on in the late 40s and early 50s. But now people have forgotten that it actually happened, and they just straight up don't believe it. They don't believe that that's a thing. It's really insane to me.
there's a lot of things that people don't believe in that happened. That is, I feel like, without completely going off topic, I feel like society is being dumbed down. And a lot of people today don't
100%.
know anything about our past. And I think a lot of our past is actually not true in the first place either. I think a lot of history has been covered up.
Oh, yeah.
This old saying goes, history is written by the people that win the wars, or however, something to that nature. Basically, whoever writes history is the ones that end up winning the battles.
And topically speaking, apparently the Nazis really won World War II. So here you are. Nobody believes a Nazi started NASA.
No, there's been too many people that have talked about it. Again, I wasn't there to say who the guy was. I don't even believe in NASA 90% of the time, but I do believe it was funded and started by the Nazi project, which was Paperclip, and that is what we're going to dive into here tonight. So,
Well, from 1943 to 1947, a movement was started. It was shifting and like changing the tides of the war before any sort of close came to World War II. Some of the more, we'll say, intelligent or on the level Nazis kind of saw the writing on the wall. They saw the way the wind was blowing prior to like any indication or any defeats happening that would show them that they were going to lose the war. And they were like rats jumping off of a sinking ship, essentially. And they were taking deals from us, the United States, and some of them were taking deals from the USSR, Soviet Russia. So essentially from 1943 to 1953 brought over not a couple thousand, but tens of thousands of Nazis to the United States. Not all of them were scientists, like the books and the propaganda that they came up with would have you believe. Majority of them were actually high-ranking military officials, diplomats, people who were wealthier. A lot of them were scientists. That's kind of how it started. The Army thought, hey, why should we waste all of these projects and this intelligence when we could use it? And at the same time, during the end of World War II, there were the rumblings of the Cold War with Russia starting. So we wanted to make sure that we had the best assets, which personally, as an aside, I think a large part of the Cold War with Russia was because we got some of the quote unquote better Nazis. We were fighting over that a little bit. But again, that's my opinion based on what I've read. So yeah, we brought them over here. Some of the, I guess you could say, less important or less beneficial war criminals were put to trial, the Nuremberg trials. And it was a whole dog and pony show where we had the more valuable ones testify against them. So it looked like the United States was doing something. We were kind of lampooning to have these men who were war criminals held accountable. And that kind of kicked off a propaganda campaign to bring over the quote unquote good Nazis who are going to help us advance and help us get to space. So this was again on the precipice of the space race and getting to the moon and a lot of other things that we had in store as a nation that we wanted to either use against the USSR or prove our superiority as far as technologically our technological capabilities go.
I was going to ask a question like, when it comes to, you said good Nazis or whatever, you weren't referring to them as being like the better ones. You were just being like more scientific good, like more
Correct.
the smarter one. Yeah.
Sorry, I should clarify. What the United States military-industrial complex at the time thought was more beneficial or could benefit the United States in whatever our military or technological goals were. That's what I mean when I say quote-unquote good Nazis.
Yeah.
Something, not even a person essentially, but something that could help us have one over on the world or another nation or take us to that next step of what our goals were in superiority on the globe, on a global scale.
I knew what you meant. I just wanted to clarify for anyone out there that would be listening that thought we were trying to make Nazis sound like they were good. So
no, none of them were. Absolutely not.
Yeah. No, that is the one thing that I don't need is people thinking that we're in support of any kind of Nazism here, because that's completely not what I'm about.
Yeah, and so that's I don't know if this was recorded, but earlier we were talking about how I have the issue when I kind of go into this and explain this to people, they somehow construe what I'm saying and get out of the conversation that I'm sympathetic to these people. No, my fascination comes from disgust, I suppose you could say. So I'm utterly disgusted that our nation did this. I'm utterly distraught that I feel like this single operation has led to the situation we're in as a nation now. And like you said, I don't know if this was recorded either, but you feel like the nation's being dumbed down and we're controlled. I'm implying that last part, but I feel like all of that is a direct result of the research that was started by the SS and then allowed to continue via Operation Paperclip. And now here we are. And that's why I talk about it. Not that they're good, not that I agree with anything that they've done, but yeah, I like knowing how we got from there to here. And I think this is a big part of it. After there was one specific Army unit that found a scientist that they wanted to bring here. And after that, it was kind of a floodgates situation. And actually, the Joint Intelligence Committee of the United States government, so they started a specific subcommittee called JOIA, or the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, and it was deliberately founded to be responsible for recruiting, hiring, and placing the Nazi scientists and other Nazi war criminals that they brought over here. That was their entire job. So Congress made a whole subcommittee for this, where they tasked people to conduct this program, and they assigned these scientists to wherever their expertise was, and they gave them funding, and they gave them new names, and they gave them homes, and they whitewashed all of their history. A lot of them started right away on weapons projects, scientific intelligence programs, and a number of other different programs within the U.S. military. And it was A-okay. And I don't remember when it was, but I listened to an interview of a man who, he's deceased, long deceased now, but he said he worked at a military installation, and he remembered the day a bunch of Germans just kind of showed up and they were running things. And I can get that information to you if I go through my notes, but it just kind of is one of those things where it's surreal when you think about it. Just think about going to work, maybe you're the boss there, and all of a sudden the United States government brings all of these Nazis in. You know where they came from, and now they're calling the shots. I mean, that happened everywhere. That didn't just happen at military installations. That happened at educational institutions. It happened at hospitals. It happened anywhere. And it was just kind of one of those things where you didn't question it. You just had to accept the fact that this was how it was going now. It's almost like doing a deal with the devil, really. But in some cases, if some of these scientists were really sought after by the United States and they were too hot, or they were way too close to Adolf Hitler or Himmler or any of them, what would happen is they would be reassigned at another military installation in a different nation, where they would be given a higher position. They would be given a managerial position or coordinating position in order to call the shots, so to speak. So a lot of them ended up in U.S. military installations in Germany, but many of them ended up throughout the world. A lot of the blowback from Congress was that the JOIA, the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, who was responsible for the placement, was a subcommittee that served specifically as intel providers for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who report directly to the president. So the president was fully aware of this. And it was Truman, and he said something along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing here, you brought Nazi war criminals here to Allen Dulles, and I'll get into Allen Dulles in a minute. But Allen Dulles was the proprietor of the CIA. He worked for the OSS. I'll get into more detail. Truman told him, you can bring scientists here, but make sure like their hands are clean, that they didn't commit mass atrocities against Jewish people. And Dulles said, okay, sure. And then continued to bring Nazi war criminals over to the United States and have the Joya committee assign them positions and new names and give them money and give them homes and hook them up with sweet jobs in education or in military installations. It's just sickening. Essentially, they were scouting talent right before the end of World War II. They had specific people that were tasked with going over to Germany and Austria and looking for the diamonds in the rough, essentially, what they thought was going to be a beneficial candidate for the program. And Truman was left in the dark, like completely about it. And so not only was there a propaganda machine working to make these Nazis seem like good investments or good people that we were just removing from this war-torn situation over in Europe, Germany, and England, and France, and Austria, but he was also being fed the same lie, and he was the president of the United States. So that should say something about the operation when the president was kept in the dark that much. I don't know, it just blows my mind when I think about that.
How much do you think the presidents are still kept in the dark today?
A lot, actually, because really, if you think about it, the tourists, there's people who've been a joint chief of staff member or in Congress or wherever in any position within any branch of government for 20, 30 years, they're lifers, but the president only gets to stay there max for 8 years. I've heard them described as tourists or vacationers, like they don't know a lot. I feel like maybe now they know a little bit more because they have to, getting off topic again, because of the whole UAP situation. I feel like I have an opinion that that's going to be at a critical mass, and that's why they have to be kept in the loop, but that's probably the only reason they're privy to the information. I think they're just kind of held up as a face. They're the customer service rep of the United States government, so to speak. That's my opinion, though.
I always say the president is a puppet. They're just there to be the voice that everyone gets to see on stage. Everything else is behind the scenes, behind the curtain that you don't really know about.
Yeah, they're the person at Comcast you yell at when your internet isn't working, basically.
Pretty much.
But yeah, I agree with that. Definitely, Brandon.
But yeah, sorry to interrupt. I was just, we need to make
No.
That's just kind of where I was thinking. I was like, I think it was Eisenhower that made the comment when he was leaving his presidency about the industrial military complex. And I think that
Eisenhower hated it.
I think that plays into with Paperclip and how things went from there. I think it all has something to do with it.
I completely agree. I haven't been in my notes to get into that. Also, I feel like a lot of that carried down to JFK. And I feel like that stressed him out a lot. And yeah, I really do. I feel like that's a burden that's been shouldered by anyone who has entered the White House as an honest person trying to do some good. That is something that they've either pieced together or been told, and they just can't deal with it. And maybe some of that does have to do with a little bit more of the physical stuff. But we'll get there in time, I guess. You and I will. So Allen Dulles was one of it was his Operation Paperclip was his as the leader of the OSS. He was kind of a vacuum jammer. And not in a good way. Him and his brother almost single-handedly started the Cold War, according to some. He was a CIA director from 1953 to 1961. But before that, he was the deputy director for the CIA of operations. And he was the OSS deputy director. He definitely played a central role. He was involved in the negotiations that led to the surrender of German troops. But also at the same time, he was sort of throwing all of these scientists and diplomats into a basket to bring them over here. So while he was doing one thing in the light, he was doing one thing in the dark. So watch the left hand so you don't know what the right hand was doing. That was Allen Dulles. That was his brother. He sort of set the world stage for future manipulation as far as this goes, with Paperclip, with regards to Paperclip. And he stoked the fires, I guess you could say, of the Cold War, which I don't know if it was in his head or he thought the American public would be more persuaded, but he stoked the fires of the Cold War, saying that, we needed these people here. We needed to have this edge over our new enemy, our new threat, our new war. So he really kind of flung some shit around, so to speak. Yeah, he, in tandem with a lot of Nazis, actually created the CIA, which, again, that's one thing. Another thing that a lot of people have a problem with me saying or have a problem believing is that Nazis helped form the CIA from the OSS. So the OSS was the precursor to the CIA. But you don't want to believe it, which is unfortunate.
I think with the CIA and everything that went on with that, what still goes on with that, there was a lot more to it than just the cover story. And I believe three-letter alphabet agencies were involved, but that's just me.
I concur. And I know the CIA's specific directive that they were given upon their inception was not to operate on United States soil, yet it seems like time after time that is all they do. So unfortunately, that is the world we live in now.
There's something that happened about 23 years ago, too, that gave them the right to do whatever they wanted to do with the whole Patriot Act. But again, that's another...
Oh dear. Yeah, that's a whole
anytime
other,
I talk about stuff that is
right
tinfoil hatty, I guess it's literally all tied together. It all branches together.
Now, like I said earlier, you don't want to sound stereotypical, but really everything happened and it's all tangential, it's all connected.
I say the same thing when it comes to stuff with UFOs and aliens and cryptids and spirits and demons and other realities. Somehow I think it's all connected one way or the other. There's all
Wait. I'm sorry to get you off track, but I'm really excited right now. This is not related. So you're more of a valet keel kind of guy then?
I believe that everything happens how it's supposed to happen, at least for us. And I don't know how to explain it that makes any sense, but I think somehow everything is all interconnected one way or the other. I don't know if we're here in a big simulation and we're all just NPC characters. I don't know if we are...
It's a window area thing like Teal where it's interdimensional and one thing affects the other and it like tears up a hole in space-time fabric. And
yes, basically one way or the other, I think things are connected. I think people see cryptids. I think maybe they're from a different plane of existence. I think people see aliens. Maybe they're not from space. Maybe they're from another existence. People see shadow people. They see ghosts. Maybe they're just another reality bleeding into ours. Maybe the universe is...
I'm with you.
Maybe the universe is true where there's multi-layers to where every decision you make, there's another decision somewhere else, so it splits off, string theory or whatever they call it. Like, I don't know. I'm just a guy with a microphone, but that's just kind of how my mind wanders.
I am inclined to agree with you, guy with the microphone.
Yeah, so that's where my brain goes. That's why I do what I do, because for some reason, I've just always thought that a lot of the weird stuff I was always skeptical about. I don't believe in a lot of the stuff. I don't necessarily believe that things are the way they people think they are, but I'm not saying what people are seeing is wrong or anything like that. But I think there's more to it than just what we believe it is.
I agree with that. I think it's a lot bigger and more vast than we can even comprehend.
I don't want to say The Matrix was a reality show, but sometimes I feel like maybe it was, in a sense that
A little bit.
I don't think that we're put here and the machines are controlling us and we're plugged in and stuff. I don't believe that aspect to it, but I feel like we are all just here in this plane of existence until people say we have a conscious, a soul, whatever. I think we ascend to a different existence, a different plane. If we're on level 3, I think we go to like level 4 after that.
Well, I started with Neil deGrasse Tyson. It's actually a panel where they talk about simulation theory. Where it's probably the lesson panel, I believe. It was 1.5 or 2 hours, and they essentially described what you just described, but they explained why, as physicists, they have come to these conclusions, and they provide their scientific research as supporting evidence to what you just said. It's really interesting.
I think I had a previous guest that mentioned something about it. I've never looked into it. I don't do a whole lot of research into simulation theory or anything like that. I only honestly heard about it maybe last year or 2 years ago. And that was because a guest mentioned it.
Wow.
I just
That is quite surprising.
it is weird. Like I knew obviously with the Matrix and everything else like that, and I always said we were probably living in a machine, and the sad reality is we're just NPC characters, non-playable, so we just go out and live our lives like The Sims and don't know anything about it. I made those jokes for years, and I didn't realize that there was actually people out there that believed what I was saying. Not that I was the one started it, but like people, I was making jokes thinking that we live in a video game, and apparently my jokes were years later coming true that, we probably actually are.
Yeah, so you were way ahead of your time with that. You were independently coming to that conclusion while scientists were actually finding evidence to prove that is more than likely the case. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I've always been a weirdo.
Can relate. I can relate to that. I was just talking about the Isaac Asimov panel with Neil deGrasse Tyson and other physicists.
I don't like that guy. He'll never come on my show because I said that, but I wasn't ever going to ask him to come on my show anyways.
He might, because he's one of those people who has to prove everybody wrong for some reason, even though he acts like he has nothing to prove. I agree with you. I feel like I hate to use this word, but I can't think of any other appropriate word, a shill. And I'm sorry to hijack what you were saying, but he reminds me of what happened to Carl Sagan. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Without going too far into it, I feel like maybe he was a plant eventually. Like he maybe started off decent and then things got a little too much for him and he got warned that he had to go a certain direction, and that's how he just started being the puppet for the science communities.
It's exactly what happened to Carl Sagan.
Mhm.
Yes. Mm-hmm. He's our Carl Sagan.
Same way with old Bill Nye the Science Guy.
Yeah, that's quite a debacle. Yes.
I find it funny that all these TV show people that we watched as children were now involved in politics and political aspects, and I was like, was that just them making it for the younger versions like of us to accept what these people say because we watched them as we were so much younger, so now they're more influential as we get older because they're the ones behind the curtains now coming out saying, hey, we got to do what they tell us to do because the science is telling us to do it. And we remember that guy. He was on TV.
Like it was planned this whole time, or
Pretty
just
much.
like they're using him because he is someone that we have trust in as adults because we listened to him as a child, or both.
Probably a little bit of both, but I feel like a lot of things has been orchestrated and planned for a very long time, and we're just living in the motions of how it goes through.
Agreed. Back quarter. That's all I gotta say.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, to get back with the paperclip thing, the original reason I wanted to do this episode was because, and I know you said you know a little bit about the Nazis were obsessed with finding occult relics. And from what I've gathered, I don't remember the exact year, but sometime before, I think, World War II, they were supposedly in communications with a different race of beings. And this is where I put on the tinfoil hat. We go down the woo woo side. But I've always heard on this aspect to it that Hitler became obsessed with what these things were talking about. And these beings were supposedly the Pleiadians, and they were a quote unquote master race because they were
Yes.
blonde haired, blue eyes, and they had
Beautiful, gorgeous people, apparently. Just breathtakingly gorgeous.
This is where the Third Reich thing came from, and they were what he strived to be because they were in communications with these all-powerful beings, and that's why he sought out to find all the ancient relics like the Ark of the Covenant and then whatever else out there that he was after. And they were doing all these weird technologies, and they claim a lot of the stuff for Paperclip, these scientists were actually influenced from a lot of the stuff that was given to them by these other races from technology, which this lady was communicating with using some sort of telepathic abilities. A lot of people say that's all bullshit because that's just 80 something, almost 90 years ago at this point. So they don't believe in it because it's not in the quote unquote books that you go to school and get these days. But I say if there's smoke, there's fire. Literally, a lot of the weird stuff has been proven. There was documents about it at some point. Like the Nazi bell was something they created. They had little discs that they flew around on that never really supposedly went anywhere. The Nazis were very more advanced than a lot of other countries at that point. So where did they get the technology? Where did they get the ideas from? How did they learn to do the things that they were doing with the rockets and everything else? So I see the plausibility of what maybe they were being influenced by something, someone, something else. I don't know.
Well, I was going to say there's actually photographs that the Russians have accessed, and there are some defectors and there are some people that have done interviews in 70s and 80s that have provided these photographs of some of the craft that the Nazis were actually working on, that they took photos of, because of course they would take photos. Mm-hmm. Why wouldn't they? They were super proud of themselves. So yeah, there is proof of that.
I know the whole flying saucer term was basically orchestrated and put out in the public by the government to basically cover up the fact of what was really going on. Like the guy that originally seen those flying things in the sky before.
Kenneth Arnold?
Yeah, Kenneth Arnold. He said that looked like a saucer skipping or whatever, but he never said a flying saucer. He never said they were circular. His actual drawings were basically in the shape of what I've always said, like looked like the Batman's Batarang. Like
or a croissant.
Yeah, like a crescent moon or something.
It could be like a croissant, yeah.
And that is how he described them. But for some reason, they took flying saucers and ran with it. And then you had Roswell that happened basically a month later after the whole UFO craze got started. And
yes,
the whole flying saucer thing happened. So completely derailing the conversation here. Do you think Roswell was actually really a UFO, or do you think they implemented the whole UFO story to get people off the case about what was going on with Paperclip?
I don't know. I really don't. And I've read so many books on Roswell. I feel like there's something to it. And the only reason I'm saying this is because there were so many witnesses that described the biological entities that were found. There was a nurse. There was just some regular private. There were multiple people that were involved that saw entities of some sort. Now, here is where I diverge. were those entities, please don't hate me for this, some sort of biological android? We don't know. But a lot of people say that the Greys are that, essentially. Now, if the Nazis were that advanced, they could have conceivably created a biological android to operate these vessels, because drones weren't a thing at that point, so they would have to have something to do it. That's getting real tinfoil hatty, but I'm on the fence about Roswell, as far as that's concerned. Do I believe it was some sort of extraterrestrial race that had come here from outer space to our planet and got shut down by the United States or crashed in a thunderstorm? No, I don't think that's what it was at all. But I don't know if it was Nazis. I don't know if it was a psyop to get us off the case of Paperclip. I don't know. Yeah, I just really don't know.
The whole topic was what got me fascinated with it. You mentioned Paperclip, of how they brought over the Nazis over here. As Paperclip, and the reason they're working with those Nazis was because of the actual thing with people say that the secret space program is real, to the Nazis were working with the Pleiadians, and lo and behold, this is what really goes on behind closed doors. Anything above Majestic is higher classification, because Majestic is like the highest classification they have for top secret. It's above the president.
Yeah, there's only 12 of them, right?
Yeah.
There's only like 12 at any given time.
Yep. Is there anything else that you have wrote down that you would like to discuss before? We keep kind of going off topic, so I didn't know if there's anything that you had wrote down that we'd like to dive into before we wrap this up tonight.
I definitely do. There's so many components of this. Earlier, you were talking about a woman who used her mediumship or psychic abilities to contact a specific race. That woman was Maria Orsich.
Mm-hmm.
And she was part of the Vril Society, which was a group of women who never cut their hair, because they said that it worked essentially as antenna to be able to communicate with these beings. So there is something to what you said about the Nazis believing they were gaining some sort of information. And a lot of people contend that she retrieved technological information in order for them to build these devices or UFOs. He provided it to them, and that's what kind of helped them win the war, essentially. I feel like they did win the war. It was just quietly. And we again made a dog and pony show of them losing. There's so many different things that we could talk about. The fact that they believed they were direct descendants of the Nordics, or the, what did you call them? The
Pleiadians.
Pleiadian race. They thought they were a direct result of the Pleiadians or the Nordics mating with Earth people, and because of that, somehow they were the rightful heirs to Atlantean technology. We haven't gotten into Antarctica like at all, which is kind of nuts if you think about it.
I'm going to have an entire episode at some point dedicated just to Antarctica, because I always bring it up here and there, but I've never sat down and did like a deep dive with someone into Antarctica. It is the only place in this world that every country agreed on one thing, and that is no one can go there. We can't get along and can't agree on anything, but for some reason they all signed some treaty saying that no one can go to Antarctica without permission.
Unless you're on a scientific excursion. And unfortunately, if you want to go to Antarctica, you have to be a research person or a part of the NSA or some other American or other nation intelligence community in order to go there.
What is so secretive about a bunch of ice?
They did find a time anomaly there, which is interesting, because a lot of people surmised that, again, Maria Orsich found out some sort of way to draw and demonstrate a diagram to give to the SS in order to create time travel. So that's kind of cool to think about.
That is part of the whole way they use the abductees for the secret space program. There's somehow there's a time control of it because people say they take their consciousness and put them into clones or alters, as they refer them
Oh,
to.
so you're going through the whole like
Mhm.
yeah, okay. The containers,
Yeah. Basically, they claim that
container theory.
yeah, everyone is that thinks that they've been involved in these programs are somehow put through de-age and to come back. Like they claim that you can be in two different times at the same time, like you can be in the same place in different places at the same time. None of it makes sense, to be honest. And I've said this to the people. I was like, I'm not trying to say I don't believe you guys, but I'm skeptical about it because scientifically it doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't mean it's not real. I just don't understand how that's possible. I feel like if you're able to control time, then why are you doing all these weird experiments and taking people and making clones of them and bringing them back or whatever? Like, why do you, if you can make the clones and you can control time, what is the point of doing this all now? Because you can go to the future and get more technology and bring it back here. And there's got to be a paradox somewhere. Like, at some point when you alter things, something doesn't happen. So if the time is able to be controlled, it's really hard to fathom how we haven't fucked it up yet. But
And maybe we have. I mean, maybe we have, and that's why it keeps happening.
I just feel like
I
at
don't
this
know.
point, if someone was able to control time, I don't understand why they're still doing what they're doing now. Like, if they're really taking these people at this point, like, at some point you've advanced enough to control time, you could have an entire legion of people from different, you know what I'm saying? To me, none of it makes any sense. But again, I'm not saying it's not real or possible or whatever. I'm just saying for me, it makes my brain hurt trying to understand it because it doesn't make any sense.
We don't have all of the information to make it make sense. I think that's the problem.
I don't think we ever will, is also the other problem. And I've said that with people when it comes to other things, when you dive into different topics about just throw out cryptids, for example, like when you see some strange things, I don't know if Bigfoot's real, but I know people are seeing something. I don't think everyone's just gone crazy and seen something running across the road and mistaken a bear for whatever they claim it is.
Right.
People
Or
know
crawlers or anything else. People see what, you know, they get that teary eye goosebump feeling and they know they're not supposed to be seeing it.
there's other things that we have capabilities of that we don't even understand yet ourselves when it comes to our own brain power. Like, you know, when someone's looking at you. You ever looked across the room and you seen someone, you make eye contact because they were looking at you because you felt like you're being looked at and then they all of a sudden turn away? Like, how do we sense that someone's looking at us? Like, we have more capabilities than what our body and what we're programmed to understand. I think for a lot of us, just kind of, we're not in tune with it anymore.
No, I getting off topic, think that's by design, 100%. If we knew what we were capable of, half of the things that happen to us wouldn't be happening to us.
That is, I don't know how to word it properly, but basically, that is something that someone else had recently told me on an episode that came out that, I forget what the term that she said, but basically, we're not meant to know. We're being kept in the dark. That's why I said they're dumbing down society earlier, because I feel like they don't want us to ascend to whatever it is we're supposed to be able to achieve. Like they want us to stay in the states that we are. For what purposes, I don't know. I don't even know who they are. Everyone's like, who are you talking about when you say they? The infamous they. Well, if I knew, I would say it.
Right. And then you're getting into Gnosticism or Hermeticism and the archons. It's a whole thing. I mean, that it's hard because at that point, the road takes you to spirituality or metaphysics in some way. And everyone's got an opinion on that. So it's really difficult to pin that down.
Hmm. Well, we can get back on topic. This
Of
is
course.
this is like I said, I don't ever have anything planned out. My shows just kind of go free flowing how they go. So sometimes they're on point, sometimes they go off the rails, but it makes it interesting.
I dig it because a lot of it has to do with something else.
Hmm. Do you think when it comes to Antarctica, what do you honestly
Yes.
think that the Nazis found down there? I know you mentioned the time loop or whatever, the way for time travel, but
Yeah, I think it's 6 minutes into the future. Scientists have been able to clock literally, like they can clock 6 minutes into the future. So it's like one little spot where they walk there, and it's like 6 minutes into the future according to all of their devices and all of their metrics. But um personally, I don't know what to think. I know that I've read about tunnels. I've read about um, under ice chambers that are capable of housing multiple submarines. I feel like maybe if we want to go crazy, that might be why a lot of the Nazis escaped to Argentina and then went to Antarctica, where they could found quote unquote New Berlin, which is actually what a defector from the Soviet Union said they did. This person said that they had a new city sort of in between the ice of Antarctica and in the earth. They called New Berlin. And then it goes back to Admiral Byrd, of course. So I don't know. I've also listened to and read about people saying there are pyramids, multiple pyramids in Antarctica, that there are bases that you can go into that are actually physically a metal building that you can manage to open the doors of and explore, and it goes deep, deep underground. There's many different things, and you just really don't know what's a psyop, what's fed to us as bullshit, or what's actually true. But I do know that this is for a fact. Admiral Byrd did go to Antarctica during Operation High Jump, it was called, in 1947. He was financed by the United States Navy, which was interesting for him because his other expeditions were not financed by the Navy. He just kind of decided to do them. He had aircraft carriers, 12 surface ships, submarines, airplanes, like 4,500 to 5,000 personnel staffed, which really called it a scientific expedition. And it's kind of strange because why would you need all that firepower for a scientific expedition? It was supposed to be for 6 months, but it ended after 2. And all of the personnel that were left fled at a great pace back to the United States. They lost several ships, like half a dozen. They lost carrier aircraft. They lost sailors. They lost officers. And after the whole scenario, Admiral Byrd said, in the event of another war, America can be attacked by an enemy that has the ability to fly from pole to pole with incredible speed. So something is there. We just don't know what it is. Prior to the expedition he went on, Admiral Byrd said, "My expedition is military in nature." But that's the only thing he said. Like, that's the only quote he gave before everything in the news and everything in the newspapers said it was a scientific expedition to see what was going on in Antarctica. Like, what's happening there? What kind of ice? What does it look like? No, he said it was military in nature. There was full-scale recon prior to him going there. A huge observation period. It was surveyed. They spent a lot of time flying over and looking at it before he even had anyone set foot in Antarctica, which is really weird if you think about it, because why would they have to do recon on an area that's uninhabited by anyone? But 2 years before his expedition began, there were 2 German submarines that entered Mar del Plata, which is a port in Argentina, and the submarines ended up landing. They got off on land, and the personnel surrendered to the authorities. And they were actually some of the more high-ranking military officials in the SS. They were directly reporting to the Fuhrer, and they were from his specific squadron. And they ended up making a deal to stay in Argentina. Yeah, they went there. They essentially surrendered to Argentina. They said they would exchange information in order to live there in amnesty. And then after that, there were 2 sequential U-boats from Germany with, again, high-ranking military officials and personnel that directly reported to Adolf Hitler that showed up. They took the same exact route down the coast of South America to get there. And then a lot of them eventually left to go to Antarctica. So who knows? Really. It's kind of nuts that
A lot of people that believe in the whole flat Earth theory thinks that the reason they don't want anyone to go to Antarctica is because that's where they run into. I kind of laugh at it. It's they think that you run into the firmament, the wall, the
ice wall.
the ice wall, the dome, the snow globe. I was like, it's funny you call people globetards, but yet you say we live in a dome. That's still like half a globe. It's still circular. I don't understand that aspect to it, but I've literally had someone say something to me the other day that if I still believe in the heliocentric hypothesis, then there's no hope for me. I'm like, okay.
Well,
I mean,
guess there's no hope for me then.
I don't know. When you go down that rabbit hole, there's a lot of questions because a lot of things still don't add up a whole lot. Just because if you look into the math portions of it, the way they do the math with the curvature and everything, it doesn't add up the way they should, because they say if you can see a ship go over the curve within 3 miles, yet you can still see it out there, because I can be on one part of. If I go up to Lake, I can see Chicago from the dunes. I can look over there and you can see part of Chicago. If you do the math, you shouldn't be able to see most of Chicago just because of how far away it is. So the point that they try to make is that the maths don't math, basically, because of the curvature. I had someone on here a few times that have talked about flat Earth, and like they make good, valid points, but at the same time, it's like I still don't believe that we live in a snow globe, or whatever you want to call it. Like I was going to say biodome, but like if that is the case, then we really are in a simulation.
It is, except for I've owned a telescope in my life,
Mhm.
and I have seen planets spherically, so I'm not sure. I'm not saying they don't have a reason to disbelieve everything NASA says, because I absolutely question everything. But get a telescope, bro.
It is almost 12:30 my time, and I have work in the morning, so I'm going to have to wrap this one up because it got started a little bit later than I wanted to.
Sorry about that, but of course, makes sense.
No,
Thank you very much for letting me nerd out about this. I really appreciate it.
I know we didn't cover a whole lot of things that we wanted to talk about, but we can always try and schedule another one here sometime in the future. And not the greatest of the last 2 weeks for the podcast, but it is what it is. This is my last interview before I go on break for about a month. So I'm looking forward to a nice little vacation away from 2 years of constant podcast.
I hope you enjoy your break and you get some peace and quiet and relaxation. And when you're back at it, just let me know, and I would be more than happy to talk about this again.
You'd mentioned prior, I don't know if you have anything planned yet or not, and if you don't, you don't have to mention it, but you'd said you're going to be doing your own podcast. Do you have a name or anything about it? So by the time this airs, if there's something out there, I can put it in the link in the show notes for anyone that would like to check it out.
Yeah. So my first episode will actually be about this subject, and it will be the Aria Anomaly podcast. Yeah, so it should be available anywhere you can get podcasts. And again, my first episode will be about Operation Paperclip.
Awesome. Do you have any idea when it will be out?
I do not. I have to talk to my sound engineer and see when he'll be done editing it for me.
Okay. Well, for anyone out there listening, if it's available by the time this episode airs, I will make sure to include a link to it in the show notes for anyone that is interested. But I think we're going to wrap this one up. So I just want to say thank you for coming on here tonight and talking with me. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise, thank you for having me.
Hey, not a problem. But on that note, we're going to head on out. So thanks for Ari for coming on here and talking, and thanks for listening. Good night.
Good night.
And that's the show, everyone. I really hope you guys enjoyed the conversations. If you would like to be a guest on Tinfoil Tales, remember to send an email to tinfoiltalespodcast@gmail.com or go to the contact section of tinfoiltales.com. Just get your message to me. We'll get something scheduled for a future episode. And just remember, the truth lies in the stories we share, the connections we make. Stay curious, stay open-minded. Thank you all for joining us on this journey. And until next time, keep questioning, keep seeking, and keep exploring the unknown. Good night, everyone.
Tinfoil Tales in the headphones. Yeah, it's time to rock. Got a story about a cryptic creature. Let's take a walk. Bigfoot, dogman, they're out there in the dark. But the truth is out there like an alien spark. UFO sightings got the whole world shook. Conspiracies unfold like a story in a book. Media control, trying to keep us blind. But oh, before gonna use my own mind. In history, they don't want us to know the secrets they hide, the truth they won't show. Dominate our society, they keep us in chains. But I'm standing tall, it's time to break the reins. Control, trying to keep us blind. But I won't be fooled, gonna use my own mind. In history